we are now live and recording. So, as we said, welcome, and welcome, Nathaniel.
Thank you very much.
So, congratulations on the launch of Liberty Bound.
Thank you. I'm delighted. It's been a long journey, but it's certainly a special feeling to have actually got it out and finished at last.
Yep. So, and that's probably one of the first things even to celebrate, because there are so many people who talk about writing a book that never finish it. So they never actually get the book finished, or then if they do finish the book, it just perhaps lies on their computers or, you know, in their drawer, and they never actually get to realise that and actually get to feel that they've got the copy, you know, in their hand even, you know. So congratulations, because that's an achievement.
I mean, this was my second attempt to write it. I tried it about 20 years ago, got about 15,000 words, and then ran out of steam. So I started again in maturity, and there's obviously a right time.
So how much of the storyline then changed from over that period of time?
It was quite considerable, actually. So the original idea was more to do with a town in the future where they lose the sense of freedom and they're entrapped by walls, but people wanting to escape from the walls. The idea then shifted to a more holistic look at what liberty means over time. New factors got introduced. My father suggested having a drug as a kind of central element to glue things together, and that was an essential element. So with time, it kind of went around my head, stuck at the back of it, and then I think elements slowly came together, and then I had a sort of a moment where it all came together one afternoon, and that's when I kind of felt confident enough to actually put pen to paper.
Yeah, well, and I think you've done a great job. You know, I think it is a really good story, rounded characters, and I think it will be a success. And all we need to do, we need to ask everybody who's here tonight as well, just, you know, once you've read it, please put us some reviews if you haven't already. You know, put a review up, because those are the great things that help other people to find your book, and that's always a good start.
Yeah, it is a sort of two-stage journey, really. It's writing the book, and then it's marketing and selling the book, and I'm learning the second stage is a lot harder than the first.
Shh, don't tell anybody. They'll all say, "Oh, we're not going to bother." And I'll try not to speak too quickly, because I know that me and my Scottish accent, when I get quite excited, I can speak very quickly. And if I've got people from other parts of the world, they might be saying, "What on earth is that woman talking about?" So I suppose I wanted just to start off asking a little bit about the original inspiration then for the storyline. You know, where did that idea come from?
So in my youth, before my ankles gave up on me, I used to play Sunday League football, and I was at an away game in my local town, in one of the less salubrious corners of the town. I mean, it was a nice area, but some certain characters around the community had kind of taken control, and it had gone downhill a bit. But as we walked to the changing rooms on this quite pleasant field where the football pitch was, the path to the changing rooms was entirely fenced off with spiralling barbed wire around it, and there was a picnic table and there was a little cordon, and that itself had barbed wire, and so it looked more like an American prison than a community hall. And it just struck me at that time that in responding to our fears, be it antisocial behaviour, criminal behaviour, or anything else, I mean, there's a lot of fear in the world at the moment, that we tend to take decisions that actually imprison ourselves. So that local community, for example, had not only had they lost a free and open community hall, they hadn't actually achieved any successes in doing it. So the antisocial elements that had forced them to protect their community hall were still there. They probably were damaging other areas. And so it seemed a good basis for a story to actually look at it as a society-wide issue, take it to the extreme, which meant taking it away from the time, making it a future dystopian story. And so I wanted to build a story around the last civilization, so to speak, clinging on to this concept of what it is to be civilized with laws and the antisocial elements ejected from society, but they themselves are the ones now who are in prison, and the prison is this wide open space beyond. The next element was obviously the title of the book, which came to me in an inspiration. So Liberty Bound, it has some wonderful dynamics in the sense that it's got a double meaning. So it's got liberty being restricted, which is the sort of imprisonment sense, but it's also got the journey element, i.e., bound to find liberty. So that gave me two sorts of directions to come at one single story, which is the fact that the characters, well, all the characters, all the elements of the book revolve around this concept of being fighting for liberty and taking a journey towards liberty. So that was the kind of cemented that original idea.
And I think you've done that really well, and I think it is challenging to this notion that those in the prison, we're not going to give away too many spoilers because we want people to go and read the book, obviously, but those in the prison are the ones who have more freedom. Yes.
So I mean, I always remember my English teacher telling me about when we were learning Great Expectations, how every character had expectations that they were trying to fulfill or meet. When, as a student, you tend to read it and only think the main character is searching for his expectations. So I use that to embed liberty in absolutely every character, every element of the story. So the environment, the landscape, the world, you're entrapped by mountains, by a desert. There's the literal walls, and there's the metaphorical walls. There's the inner battles that the characters have. All the lead characters have some sort of internal battle that they need to overcome to break down the walls and free themselves. And that goes from the good guys to the bad guys. And even the time it's set, that once again, there's quite a critical sentence in there where one of the characters refers to the fact that being at the end of time, they know what mankind can achieve, but they don't have the ability to achieve it anymore. And that's another sense of imprisonment. So throughout the story, I wanted to have that as a thread. And you've obviously got the main narrative as well, which is similarly this kind of journey to freedom.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's great to hear, like you say, all those layers that are going on. And building the world, because this notion where you're writing, whether it's a fantasy or something that's not set of this time, and you've created this other world. Did that come? Did you build that world separately, and then think about fitting your characters into it, or did it evolve from the characters kind of having to interact with it in some way?
I think there's a bit of both. So I always like to see my stories as having almost a theatre stage. So you have the limitations. So that enables, I think you get far more creativity if you've got borders and you have to come up with the imagination within those limitations. With CGI in modern movies, you lose that, and so you have these unbelievable things. So I deliberately wanted a world which had these restrictions, be it the environmental or the climatic issues and the geographical issues. But similarly, as you write the story, although I had planned it out, as you write the story, you see opportunities to bring in what that means in the world. So as I mentioned earlier, the drug element was a development, and there were other things that the limiting of resources, the fact that it's a world with minimum resources available, that was an original concept, but it then helps shape how you actually develop the story, be it the only trade that takes place is prisoners having to go out and find the treasure in return for the drug that sort of sustains them. So it's an evolving process, but based on that original foundation and stage.
Yeah. And the whole notion of the drug is, I think it's really well done in the way that you've introduced it, this whole, because there isn't because everybody has it.
Yes.
So
The original problem with the story was, without the drug, was why do the prisoners need to stay if they're free outside the walls? What's keeping them imprisoned?
Yeah.
So the drug was quite essential for that, but it also became a metaphor for our own times, in the sense of, so what is it today that we are dangerously addicted to in our lifestyles that we think we can't do without, but in reality it's doing us probably just as much harm as it is good. And you could say, in America that might be guns, around the world it might be cars and general industry, and then you've got the more obvious, we are a society where drugs are a real problem, so you've got the literal issue as well. So but there's all those areas that the Jumbla, which is the name of the drug for those that haven't read it yet, it represents that hold that certain elements of lifestyle have on us, and stop us from breaking out and being free.
Yeah. You're in amongst that world as well, because you also developed a sense of language that had to come with it. There's some new swear words that I've kind of found in here that I'm thinking that should actually could fall into language quite easily now, that nobody else would know that you were kind of swearing at them. How did that all evolve then for you?
It's hard to say. I mean, the story has violence, it has sort of bad language, but at the same time it's not a violent story or a story with bad language. And I've always admired the fact that the old-fashioned classic adventure stories, be it Treasure Island or that ilk, that they didn't need bad language, they didn't need violence to actually portray a really exciting or dangerous time and story. And so there's a few bloodies in there, if you'll forgive my language live on the recording, but in essence I thought, well, I can create my own one. So some of them use the other key element of the story of what are known as the ferals, who are the misunderstood but feared wild savages of the world, and of course they become a core of any language in terms of anyone you dehumanize gets put into a swear words. We do it in our language, I'm sure, and so that they became a basis. And then the other one, which is Chronax, which gets used plenty. It just sounded right. So I think that's one that may, if the book does well, it may find its way into the language. I don't know.
So we start going Chronax.
Yeah.
So when you start to see the kind of hashtag of it appearing now,
exactly.
then you'll know you've made it.
I've got an interesting book by Robert Graves of I, Claudius fame, but he wrote a sort of small book about the evolution of swear words, and that was back in the day when what we class as swear words probably weren't used in polite society, but he talks about the evolution of them, so that they get used in society, but the more they get used, the more diluted they become, and so they evolve into new ones. So maybe when we've run out of the foul language of today, we can move on to Chronax.
I think it's definitely one to watch then, one you can look out for. Your characters, though, are quite, like I said, there's multi-layers, and there's lots of interesting connections between the characters, and great dialogue as well to kind of move the storyline, between those characters. With Finbarrel obviously being, the kind of main, the kind of main kind of character, I suppose, in there, that we're he's the rebel that we need. Did you did you, were the characters, have they got any traits from well, we might not say because there's anybody watching that actually they are from part of them, but often I talk to writers who have said that they've picked up a character where they've pulled elements from people that they've known and put them into certain aspects of different characters they're writing.
I'm sure there's an element of that, and certainly the names are actually taken from people I've known. I corrupted them, so I used to work with someone called Finbar, which I believe is an Irish name, and I just thought with time it will evolve into Finbal. Mm-hmm. But in terms of where I've drawn the characters, I think I've probably borrowed more from, as I say, these classic books of old. So Finbal, particularly in the first draft, started out as a pure hero, a sort of alpha male with no faults, etc., etc. With a bit of guidance and advice from some helpful people, I learned that you had to build the character, develop some flaws. So where those flaws came from, probably a bit of myself and a bit of general literature and other characters. And in terms of the chemistry between all the characters, I think that's, if you have that spine of the story that really works, then those characters actually evolve as you write. So I saw opportunities for some of them. So there's a character in there called Johansson who has a sort of speech impediment, I guess it is, but he was just a character who had one scene to begin with, but I realized he was a likable character. He was the man of today who's left behind due to a disability or something, but at the same time he kind of finds it right through to the end of the story in a sort of quite an enjoyable way, and sort of comes together in a smaller group towards the end, which is very good.
Yeah. And I think one of the things for me with the characters, I could see, as I was reading through the book, I'm getting quite excited as to what's going to happen, and then you're a bit concerned about what's going to happen. Yes. And that's the thing when you really identify with a character. And I know, again, from just from my husband's writing and his characters, he writes crime fiction books, so his characters, I was so attached to, and when he kind of stopped, he was getting into a situation of kind of like stopping writing a particular series. It was like, no, I want to know, you have to come back and finish this. So, I mean, have you got attached? We won't tell which characters are still there at the end if you've not read it, but have you got attached to the characters in a way that you want to still, have them around and be writing?
Yes. I mean, even although I've started a sequel which leaves behind some of the characters from this time, I do want to return in the next, the third in the trilogy, if that ever gets written, to some of the other characters, perhaps. But yes, no, I mean, by the end of the story, it felt like it was either a dream that I had, one of those vivid dreams that you belong to the world, or one of those really engrossing films that you watch one evening and you feel like you're part of the story and you're friends with the characters. Mm-hmm. And it was, I realized at one stage where I was sort of saying, everyone in the prison, for example, dies after a couple of years, that was going to cause problems, because I didn't want all my characters to suddenly drop dead because it's so dangerous. So I can assure everyone that only a percentage die.
That's it. Yep. There's still lots of them around for us to stay part with. In terms of the sort of writer's muse, right, that sometimes happens, and people will talk about that when you've got that free flowing element, when you're actually, you're kind of in the zone and you're just writing. Did you experience that, during your time?
I did at the beginning, at the end, at the end. The middle section was the tough one. I just posted a blog where I liken it to running a marathon, and I say that from no experience whatsoever. But it's that kind of, when you're halfway and you've lost the enthusiasm that you had at the start and you can't see the finish line. That's the tough time, and so you just got to keep ticking away rather than doing it. But you then reach a point where you suddenly realise that actually you've hit the channel again, and you're back in the groove, and then it flows. And once that's you can move on to the next sort of stage. But I guess it's like anything in life. There's peaks and troughs as you write, and that was certainly the case. But once you can see that finish line, it's great motivation to actually write. So
you studied history.
I did.
So has that been, has your interest in history then helped you, do you think, actually look at, how you've wanted to kind of develop your writing and share these concepts?
Yeah, I think, everyone knows there's wonderful histories to be learnt, wonderful lessons to be learnt from history, and most of us ignore them at our peril, as any politician will prove for us. But I see, particularly when you're writing about the future, it's about really writing about the past, but taking those marker points through history and just carrying the line on, so you know what's going to happen. So you can see along the line that, for example, after the coronavirus and Donald Trump, there will be some major event, not this year, not next year, somewhere down the line, because of the multiple factors that come out of all these issues. And it's the same in interpreting history to make a story for the future. You recognize certain parallels that trigger events, and most of the time people don't actually recognize what's going on at the moment. Everything seems to come as a surprise, but historians always can tell you, no, that was obvious, it was going to happen. But it's marrying those kind of insights and projecting it into a future, I think, is quite an interesting idea. And my inspirations are people like George Orwell, who obviously tapped into what was going on throughout his world, both socially within Britain and abroad with Russia, and his experiences from the Spanish Civil War, and then turning that into a dystopian world like 1984.
And one of the other aspects, I suppose, is just like you're seeing, you're surrounded by books, a few other people sitting there surrounded by books. And one of the things that's really missing from this, from the world, from Athenia, is books.
Yes. Yeah.
And that knowledge, I suppose, that that just has now disappeared. And I thought that was because I started to think about what would it be like if you didn't have access, to books or knowledge in that way.
I think what inspired me on that is a sense that in our own time, despite knowledge being more available than ever before with the internet, etc., it seems more restricted or controlled than ever before. Now, I'm not sure if that's entirely true, because you could always argue that any writer is influenced by politics or the society of his day, but just in terms of the consumer society and the marketing that goes with it nowadays, choice is an unusually vague thing these days. It's hard to say that I choose something, because it seems to be chosen for you. And I think there's a sense that our power to think for ourselves and make decisions on our own it has been curtailed somewhat by the general flood of data and information, and that's an element that what I wanted to kind of start. Not only is food and water short in this world, but also this access to knowledge and books.
And it's an interesting one. Like you say, when we're living in a world now where you think you have choice, and you pop onto, for those of you who are on Facebook, you pop onto Facebook and suddenly you're compounded with all the ads for something. You realise, I'd been looking for something on Google about that. So
something like Twitter, where you don't actually have a middle ground anymore. So you can like something or you control something. There's very little middle ground in terms of honest, critical comments or just debate.
Yeah.
And you have this kind of mob mentality, and you know, it takes away the individualism of thinking, but at the same time, you know, you can argue it gives a lot of freedom to the individual to speak out, but there's something that's not quite right with it, I would say.
Yeah. And just this last question I kind of want to just kind of explore and go into a little bit is the punishment, I suppose, is quite severe. You know, and the way that you know you know, there's very little leeway around. You know, it's very controlled and just and swift, and you know, justice is served by those who decide what justice is. And I get, so was there another thought behind, you know, that for you as well, when you were
I wanted it to be quite ambiguous, so I always set it in the context of they see the punishment as being civilized. So they're clinging on to civilization, they retain a law and order, and punishment there is no death penalty, for example, but there is death penalty in the sense that people are abandoned to a wilderness where they can't possibly survive. So it's hypocritical in that sense, but it was something that I just felt you have to, in a world like that where you're clinging on to something, you're blinded to everything else to save that one thing. And I think even later in the story, when Finbar himself gets a bit of control over law and order, he discovers that it's not quite as straightforward as right or wrong, or making everyone happy. It's a complicated old thing, and I'm sure we've got a few judges on the call today. I'm sure they've got a view.
They'll recognise some of what you're saying. So we've got a few questions that have come up in the chat, right? So I'll ask you what we've got here, and then we'll move on to a chance for you to kind of read us some part of the book. And while you're reading, if there's anybody else thinking of questions, but I'm going to come through some of the questions that we have just now. So John and Kiveta have said, do you identify with any of the characters?
I think one puts a little bit of oneself into the hero. So you know, Finbar, when he talks, it's me talking, I think. But at the same time, hopefully we're not the same.
You'll need to ask your family later then.
Yes.
So Bob has asked, do you base the city and the landscape on places that you know?
No. Although that said, my parents went on a train journey across Canada, and they always reminded me of, they talked about the Rocky Mountains. So you've got Vancouver, which is, you know, a lush, beautiful city. But on the other side of the Rockies, there's a patch of area which is sort of desert-like, and then it rises into the hills. And I quite like that idea of an isolated community that side. We don't know what's on the other side of the mountains. It might be Vancouver or whatever, but that sort of inspired the sense of isolation in a terrible sort of environment. But perhaps more globally speaking, it was global warming.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was thinking, you know, as I was reading through it as well, I was thinking there was the kind of walled city. I was thinking of some of the walled cities that I've been in, and just, you know, kind of, you know, so I suppose that's like everybody creates their own.
Yes, I didn't want to place it, sort of say this is the UK in 5,000 years' time and after global warming. I wanted it an ambiguous location, and the fact that mountains have arisen in UK, that's beside the point.
Okay, so you know, John's asking another question, but tell us more about the drink, and how do we pronounce this?
Right,
the Kawak.
Kyle with the I can't even say it. The chap who's done the audiobook has done a wonderful job, and
I was going to say that. It's
spot on.
How do you pronounce
Yes.
that?
No, so lots of the names that I use, both for characters and items such as the strong drink of the community,
Yeah.
I wanted to borrow from familiar words of today, so familiar names, familiar cultures. So you'll see lots of the cultures, lots of the names have a link to a culture, be it Finbar to Ireland, Abenatra to Spanish, Kiowa, whatever the thing's called, to Polish or Czech or whatever.
Yeah.
There's an African name in there. So I wanted to sort of, as the future takes hold, it's this melting pot of cultures, and this is the legacy, their names. So that's where it came from.
Yeah, but it's certainly quite strong drink anyway. For them.
Yes, well, I'm fully aware that the Czechs like their drinks, so I thought they'd appreciate that.
And Sarah has asked, how far along are you with the second book then? So
I've written 16 chapters, which I think is about halfway. So it's still very rough, but it's going to be in 2 parts. This one, one book, but 2 distinct parts because I want a time zone. So I think I've just about finished the first part, and I think there's some good new characters in there.
That's good. We're looking forward to hearing about that. Right, and we have. So it's said that many times the opening sentence is the hardest bit to get right. What are your thoughts on that?
I can tell you I rewrote it a 1,000 times. It's always been much of a muchness in terms of what it was trying to say, but it's been reworded and sharpened and get the nuances right. But they're absolutely right. A book can be sold on a opening line, can't it? So it is important, and hopefully my one is creates a bit of tension straight from the off.
Yeah, it does indeed. And are we reading from the start of the book, or
no? I've taken a section from chapter 4, which kind of gives a not too much away, but it gives a sense of the environment.
It's always the bit, isn't it? We don't want to have too many spoilers. So,
no.
Sarah's also asked, where did the cover come from? Okay, and are there elements of you speaking in the book? So, the cover idea.
Well, the cover came from indie authors, well, to be honest. So I had designed my own cover as an idea, which I shared with Kim and her team, and they poo-pooed it quite rightly. I was poo-pooed. No, but, I mean, this is why you rely on the professionals to support you with something like this, is understanding the market and how it might impact. So I don't know the name of the designer, I'm afraid.
Well, it was actually my husband who did this. It was Sinclair who did the design for this one. Yeah.
So so I was offered two designs to choose from, and this one was the standout option. And it's I like the drama and the subtlety of it at the same time. So it's the fist is almost lost in the flames, but the fact that it is lost in the flames almost is symbolic of a world on fire, and a rebellious fist standing out amongst it as a beacon of hope. So the colours really work, and even the font and everything like that kind of just fits right. And I would have hated a book with a sort of naked feral or something like that, like some of these. I'm not a fantasy fan, I'll be honest. So I wouldn't want to have a characterized cover to try and capture the world, because I don't think I can even. I'm not even sure if when they offer me the millions to make the film, I'm not even sure I can picture them turning it into a appropriate film.
Yeah, and one of the things about covers, I mean, what I say to everyone is, you always judge a book by its cover.
Yes. That old cliche. Yes, it's true.
Exact opposite of what everybody says, but it's true. I mean, I think the cover is, it's striking as well, and it hopefully just captures people's imaginations to want to know more. That's what we want. Sarah had said, or what she was saying was, I was asking a question, are there elements? And she said, no. She says, there are elements of you in the book.
Right, fair enough. I used to beat her at work, I'm sure.
And we have just, Gwen is actually saying that she really enjoyed your short stories and she's looking forward to reading this. And you mentioned that there's a trilogy. But, do you have any plans past this? Espionage, perhaps?
Well, possibly. No, I do actually have a comedy that I want to write. I've got it all mapped out up here and written down as a plan, but it's going to be a sort of satire stroke silly comedy that which will be a slight shift of genre. So I hope my fan base doesn't lose faith with me.
I'm sure once you've got those millions strolling around you, they'll be happy to read anything that you put out for them. Then that'll be it. And I suppose you mentioned then, when the film rights come calling and Hollywood's chapping at the door. Have you got anybody in mind that you'd like to play Finbarrel then? Because that's
I don't really know that many modern film stars, to be honest. I'd have to look back. If we're looking back into any age of cinema, I'd get someone like Jimmy Stewart back or someone like that. I think that'd be my preference.
Well, what we'll do is I'll make sure that I get to be part of the casting crew then,
yes,
just so I can give them the nod as to whether they're favourites or not. Bob is just saying, looking forward to the humorous book, because there's quite a lot of humour even in the dialogue in Liberty Bound. So
yes, I was told to tone it down by one of the editors, because it kind of undermined some of the more sensitive moments. So
and it is that balance, isn't it? Like you say, if you're trying to, I think if there's nothing at all that's light in a book, and then it's very bleak. And we've all read some stories like that are just bleak stories.
Yes. And I mean, in real life, I'm sure people working in the medical profession at this moment will have survived because of some humour, or be it black humour or any type of humour in it, and it's what keeps people going. So even in the darkest moments, a joke is something that's essential, I think. Yeah,
absolutely. So thank you. So that's our questions for the moment. There, you can relax.
Right, I've got the reading to do.
So what I think it would be good then for you to kind of get the bit prepared for what you're going to read. And I'll start off then just by kind of just reading a bit of the blurb for everybody if they haven't read it, so that we know where we've got the overview of the story then is. So we have that it's the end of the civilization, and the remnants of society are hanging on to the edge of survival, having retreated behind walls while prisoners roam in the wide open space beyond. But is anybody free? Finbarrel is a guard defending the walls of Athena, fighting to keep the flame of civilization burning. It is the only world he knows, and one he's willing to die for. But when he intervenes to protect a boy and his mother from a fellow guard, little does he realise his world is about to unravel, setting him upon a dangerous journey of betrayal, heartbreak, and discovery. Wow. There we go. So that's it. Set. There we are. The scene is set, and over to you, and we'll enjoy listening to.
So this is a slightly abridged version, just to get it done in time and in an enclosed thing, and it's a slightly edited version, so that all the the hesitations, the mispronunciations, it's all in the text actually. So, chapter 4. Finbar found Garrett Abkula at the stable outhouse. The prematurely boarding guard nibbled the last scraps off an apple core. Finbar looked enviously at the narrow remains of the fruit, teased by distant memories of the last apple he ate as part of his rations. The stable boy led out 2 camels, who sniffed the air with noble disdain. Garrett grabbed the rein of the paler beast and presented the apple core on the palm of his hand. The camel's lips curled round the fruit and gratefully ate the scant remains. As Finbar took the reins of his camel, he wondered if those big moist eyes judged him, accusing him of neglect at his lack of a gift. The last thing he wanted was a temperamental beast, personally affronted by his master. Finbar offered a compensatory scratch under the camel's chin. The creature emitted a distinct groan that Finbar elected to interpret as contentment, though in truth they groaned for every emotion. "Where are the prisoners?" asked Finbar. Garrett nodded to his left. "Bouget's bringing them. Seems one's having second thoughts." Garrett laughed at his own joke. "Should have thought about that before breaking the law," huffed Finbar. He found it all so pitiful. A sobbing announced the arrival of the two prisoners, both with hands bound. Finbar recognised the eldest as a senior farm manager named Gorwell. He maintained a dignity, staring forward in defiance. The other man's cheeks were red from tears. He stood, stooped in abjection. The face looked familiar, but in no meaningful sense. Finbar didn't care. What was there to care about, with justice served and troublemakers removed from the civilised confines of Athenia's walls? Each guard learnt this mantra as the unquestionable truth from an early age. A long rope tethered the two prisoners to the camels' saddles. Finbar sat atop his beast as it rested upon the ground, adjusting his rifle strap so not to rub on the ride. "Where's that bloody priest?" he growled, but no one in particular. The party would be going nowhere until the man who blessed the Jumla turned up. A braying echoed from an adjacent alleyway, and moments later the priest emerged, riding awkwardly upon a donkey. Finbar signalled to the small troop of guards to move on their way. He wasn't waiting for the priest to reach them. Finbar's camel roared as he tugged the reins sharply, making it rise to its feet. In front, Garrett's camel took its first steps down the alley. Behind, waiting patiently, were the other accompanying guards. Finbar fidgeted to a comfortable position, rubbed his camel's neck and urged it forward. He jerked backwards, bracing his legs to compensate, and turned to ensure the prisoners were safely in tow. The priest showed no signs of hurrying to catch up. When they turned from the alley into the main square of the town, a large crowd awaited. It was a customary send-off for convicted prisoners. The wardens instigated the tradition, providing the mob with a target for its frustrations. An empty column divided two groups of about 300 baying people. At the front, a row of youngsters stood armed with dried camel dung, thrown with practiced accuracy as the prisoners passed. The camels peered nervously, but kept a disciplined, indoctrinated pace. "Traitors, thieves, murderers!" The crowd yelled a range of unsubstantiated accusations with a passionate and sincere vitriol. "But I'm innocent!" cried Pryfall. A fruitless gesture. The volume of the mob increased, dashing hopes of mercy or forgiveness. They now had a focal point for their dung. The huge gates of Athenia inched open, while a drawbridge eased down over the dry outer moat. In the hollow defensive channel running from the southern hillock of Bymore to the northern ridge called Cragor, row upon row of stakes and thorny shrub bushes shouted an aggressive warning. A deep thump echoed through the ground as the drawbridge dropped into place. The leading camels strolled onto the wooden surface, grateful to escape the noise, sniffing at the air around. A faint odour of death lingered. Finbar looked down to see the rotting corpse of a feral in the moat, its body pierced in several places by stakes. Finbar felt nothing. For the prisoners, everything had changed. No longer protected by the walls or guns of Athenia, the ferals were their new neighbours. If a feral attacked, they would have to defend themselves with whatever nature provided. Their home was now the prison, the wilderness before them, where death came sooner rather than later, inevitably involving pain and fear. Athenia's way of maintaining its facade of civilized law, yet punishing its criminals in the most horrible way. Another thug signalled the doors closing behind them, and Finbar ordered the procession forward into the wasteland.
Excellent, thank you very much. Well done.
Thank you. I rehearsed that all day and was making mistakes all day, so I was quite pleased with flowing through that one.
Yeah, it can be, when you're actually reading your own words, you actually read it and think, oh, I wrote that. That's good.
Sometimes, oh, did I really write that?
Yeah, I think that's often the case. I think when some you know, I've spoken to writers who maybe have written, you know, several books over the, and they go back to something that was about, and reading it and thinking, I don't even remember writing this. You know, it's just that's the bit. It's almost that the book's done and it's out of the way, and it's kind of, well, it's past, and it's almost like reading somebody else's words when,
Yes,
when it's
definitely.
moved on.
Definitely.
So congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm going to move the. Well, let's see if there's anybody got a question, and I'm going to move the screen back so that we can do a gallery view of everybody then. So there we go. We're back on Gogglebox again with the multi-view from everybody.
Can I just say a quick word?
Yes. Hello, Brian. Yes.
Yeah. No, I've really enjoyed hearing the background to the way the book's written. I've read it. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to the second and possibly third books coming out. Thank you.
Thanks, Dad.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Brian. Is there anybody else? Anybody got a question? Anything that they want to ask or say? You can just unmute yourself. Oh, Graham, hold on a wee second. I'll just unmute you. There we go. Here you are.
Thoroughly enjoyed your reading just now, and it sounds a really interesting book. If you're thinking about a sequel or a prequel or whatever, as far as your characters are concerned, with the passage of time and so on, coming back to these characters after many months or whatever to continue a sequel, do you keep notes of the characters in terms of their main foibles and so on, or do you leave it just to your memory to pick up on these things?
To be honest, it's my memory. I think this perhaps answers an earlier question about how much of me is in some of the characters, and it's probably says that there's quite a bit of me. So when I do revisit, I probably bring that element back to it. I'll be honest, I'm probably not a professionally organised writer at this stage yet. I'm still very much minimalist planning and memory. This book obviously, you know, been in the back of my mind for a good 20 years. So future, as I learn the process, I'm sure I will become more ordered and start creating these profiles of characters that can be more robust in terms of transferring and maintaining them throughout the sequels and other elements, and obviously learning into other books that I might write.
Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Right, I'll just mute you again. This is where and we're coming to Bob. Okay. You maybe had to unmute yourself, Bob, actually, just because I think when you came in, that's you. Yeah, there you are.
Hi, Bob.
Yeah, thank you for the reading and thank you for the interview. It was great fun, and I really enjoyed reading the book. Certainly looking forward to the sequel. Excellent. It's a real page turner. Well, I was reading it on a Kindle, so it's not really a page turner.
Page swiper.
Page swiper, yeah. Just a question. Are you as pessimistic about the future as the book suggests?
Yes. My faith in humanity, from global warming to avoiding future wars, I don't think humanity as a whole has the ability to avoid some of the payback that is coming our way.
Recent events suggest you're right.
Yeah. Exactly, yes. Who could argue against it with the current crop in power?
Where are you based? Are you in England or Scotland? Or
in England, yeah.
England. Oh, never mind.
So I think things better up north. Are you suggesting I'll be more optimistic if I move north of the border?
Well, at least we don't have a numpty as Prime Minister. Right?
I can possibly comment as a civil servant. Yeah, so I mean, I've written a blog where I've sort of said, you know, I would expect, for example, life expectancy to drop because, you know, people are eating poor diets and you give them the choice and they still eat poor diets. So I can't see something like that improving on time. But then again, mankind has a certain habit of the scientists saving everyone by coming up with a breakthrough that means that they can help life expectancy increase. So there's always these factors that you can't determine, which may offer a future. The corona outbreak is kind of, there's an element of some of the positive social outcomes of that, be it more sense of the community, the environmental impact that it's demonstrated in terms of the variance with what was going on before. So, you know, there are obviously areas for hope, but generally speaking, I can guarantee that the world will go back to producing carbon and etc. at the same rate, and if not more, very quickly. So on that basis, I remain a pessimist.
Mm.
There you go.
I hope you're wrong.
You know. Well,
Yes,
join in for Bob next week as well. We'll hear about Mike and the microscopic aliens next week.
That's our one hope, is aliens.
They may come and save the world yet.
Yes.
Thanks, Bob. Anyone else got a question or a comment that we have not already? Okay, so what I'm going to suggest, and actually I'm going to unmute everybody, because I think in normal circumstances, if we were all in the room, we would give Nathaniel then a big cheer and a congratulations for you know, just for saying well done for being part of that. So if you don't mind, I'm going to unmute everybody, and I'd like you all, you know, just a wee second to wait a sec. I'm going to. Why is it not? I want to mute. I want to. Right, we're going to, hopefully, let's not do everything for everybody. I think you might actually have to unmute. I can unmute some of you. Some of you I'm going to ask to unmute, so if you can actually go, it's not playing to unmute everybody all at once. There we go. Right, let's do. Some of you might have to unmute yourselves. There we are. How are we doing? Have we all got? Let's to mute. Let's to mute. Right. It's great when buttons just work quickly and you can go, yeah, there we go. There we are, hopefully.
Thank you.
Hopefully now we can
Good.
hear everybody, just about, I think. So, right. So after 3 then, what I'd like to do is a big cheer, say congratulations, Nathaniel, well done. So 1, 2, 3, then a big round of applause.
Well done, Nathaniel. Well done.
Well done, congratulations, congratulations.
Thank you everyone, and thank you everyone for taking part and joining me this evening. It's most appreciated.
And just before we go, where can they get your book then? Where can we buy your book? This is what we want to know.
Anywhere other than Amazon UK. No, it's there's a slight technical hitch on the paperback version on Amazon UK at the moment, so we're trying to sort that. But
just something about that. I've got the same problem with Amazon Spain.
Oh.
My book's fine, Amazon UK, Amazon France, Italy, Germany, whatever, but Amazon Spain, I've got the same problem, only the Kindle is available.
Yep, Amazon occasionally are a bit of a law unto themselves, so we're trying to sort some stuff out here. So, but it's available virtually everywhere else. So
it is, yes. So but as ebook and paperback, and even via Amazon, you can still find other sellers through the thing if you're after a paperback. Book Depository and Hive, and if it says out of stock, as long as there's still a purchasing button, then ignore the out of stock. It simply means you're probably the first one. Yep.
And there is an audiobook, and Sarah was just asking, you've got an audiobook coming.
So my friend Leon, who is on tonight, has kindly produced the audiobook for me, and he's got an actor friend called Hugh Commode, who's very talented and has done a wonderful job. So that is finished now and just being uploaded onto the sites now, and I think that's really going to give an extra dimension to the book.
Yeah, well, looking forward to that. So So can we say thank you to everybody for coming and joining us this evening. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please go in and read the book, because it is really, it's an excellent book. And if you have read it, do us a favour for Nathaniel and put a review up there somewhere, either Amazon, Goodreads, or any other site that you've bought it from. You can certainly add a review, and that always helps. And tell all your family and friends too. Let's spread the word about this great book. So thank you so much. Thank you, Nathaniel. It's been lovely to talk to you tonight, and lovely to see your friends and everybody come and join us. So good luck.
Yes, thank you to everyone.
Good luck.
Good luck.
Good luck. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Bye.
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 Bye.